I've read your book, The Unmade Bed, The Messy Truth About Men and Women in the 21st Century, which seems apt for today, International Women's Day. But surprising that we're discussing a man's perspective on these issues here on March 8. Or is it?
Story of my life. Like, launch a book about a man's position on gender on International Women's Day. That really says it all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you're in good company, because our Prime Minister's wife encouraged us to think about the men in our lives today as well, which was fairly controversial and the #1 story on thestar.com today. So maybe we should begin there.
Okay.
All right. You talk a lot in this book about men and their perspective on relationships. What is the role of the modern man in equality?
Well, I actually love these he for she things and the various forms of them that have been done, which the Instagram post was the sort of same thing, like bring these men into these discussions. I mean, this is maybe the 20th, 25th interview that I've done on this book so far. Not a single man. I've not talked to a single man about it. It's actually kind of amazing. I mean, I knew that men didn't talk about gender. Like, I knew that they didn't talk about their own relationship to having a gender identity. I wrote about that in the book, but I didn't know the silence was so deep and so ingrained. And, the thing is, most of this book is actually about, problems with men. Right, there is a mortality rate in the U.S. For middle-class white American males that is, the K-Steaton report came out last year, and it compared it to the mortality rate to the AIDS crisis. And I think it's largely because men will not deal with the changing gender norms and the changing expectations of what it is to be a man, and they're literally dying from it. So I think it's good for men to be involved in the gender discussion, but not for women's sake. It's actually for men's sake. But as I said, men don't really talk about gender. They talk about sports and clothes. That's actually how they talk about gender. Is they talk about it through sports and length of cuff. Things like this. What was the right decision in that baseball game? That's actually how they're talking about gender. They just won't actually talk about what they should be talking about.
What do you think they should be talking about?
Well, for example, men's jobs in the middle class are being annihilated, and that has nothing to do with anything. That's just a week after Donald Trump was elected, Otto, the self-driving truck company, delivered its first load of 50,000 cases of Budweiser in Colorado. So that's the #1 employer that provides middle-class income to non-college graduates in the United States in 29 different states. It's a huge employer, and those jobs are all going to be gone. And men are not taking jobs as nurses, as they're not. That women have taken men's jobs, but men have seen no willingness to go to the other side, and because of that, that's when you start saying, well, let's blame the Mexicans. Right, let's blame somebody else, and that's how Donald Trump is the end result of this non-thinking about gender, for sure.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the format for the book. For those who haven't seen it yet, it's 8 chapters. A lot of them are essays that you have worked on and published in the past, but they contain something new, which is footnotes, which is Sara.
Right.
Dive bombing into your narrative.
The best part of the book, yeah, for sure.
I kind of thought so.
Yeah.
No, I think the book is good.
Let's just be honest here, right?
But I loved it because you're reading along and you're going along on this argument, and then there's an asterisk, and there is Sara saying, actually, no, you're wrong about that. You're misremembering what happened in our life at this moment, or you're wondering what I'm writing on the iPad while I'm on the gurney giving birth. Well, what I'm writing is I'm not going to be at the office the next day, right? Which is it's wonderful, and it's got a light back and forth that works, and it feels very real. How did you decide upon this model?
Well, I'm an editor by trade, so I spend a lot of time writing notes in the margins of things. And Steve has an advantage as a writer in that he has in-house pre-editing before he sends stuff I would say it's an advantage. Sometimes it's a source of marital strife.
Not really. I mean, well, sometimes. But, yeah.
You didn't like it when sometimes I'd write the word "huh"
That
in the
I can't
margin
stand.
with a question mark.
That's
Huh?
actually, that's off, that's not acceptable.
So I've learned to be a little more diplomatic and generous in spirit in my notes. But Stephen had this manuscript, and of course I was desperately interested in what he was doing, so I read it, and I had thoughts and feelings, and I wrote them in the margins, and they weren't just one word, question marks. They were sometimes like rebuttals. And sometimes they were passionate, sometimes my script would get really big. Sometimes I'd turn the page over and start writing on the back because there wasn't quite enough room in the margins.
Always a bad sign when an editor does that. Like, I ran out of space for my critique.
I'm actually going to put the pen down. I'm now going to type this long rebuttal. Check your email, hun. So the notes were robust. And I think Steve thought they were valuable, and thankfully so did his wonderful editors who, gave the opportunity to include them in the book, which is really cool and fun. Steve did all the heavy lifting. He actually did the reporting and the research and read all those studies that I just took the manuscript home one weekend and added a bunch of thoughts. But I think it's worthwhile because so much of what the book contains is derived from personal memoir. And of course, in every relationship, there's 2 points of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel like when I read books about people's marriages that I'm reading lies, right? Not necessarily intentional lies.
Right.
It's not necessarily like they're saying, like they're even willfully misleading you. It's just that, every marriage has 2 points of view. And I also think like the interesting questions of gender that we're facing are not ones with one point of view. I think, especially on the internet where things get so caught up in particular perspectives and like here is my point of view this is what women are going through or versus this is what men are going through. Well, the interesting questions about what's happening in gender right now are actually the meeting place, like where those two things are happening at once. And those are the questions of intimacy, those are the questions of the real transformation that we're living through. They're also the questions of our daily lives. So it seemed to me like these essays that Sara would write in rebuttal, or they weren't always in rebuttal either. They were just something like, "You're misinformed." Like, here's some more info. Here's what actually is involved here, right?
Right.
Which is, it wouldn't make sense for me to incorporate that as a man, and say like, well, actually, this is what a woman who has a high-powered job experiences, right? There's no way that could come off in a correct way. So why not just combine the perspectives and, see if the meaning can be found somewhere in between?
Right. Also, one of the seminal essays in the book comes from and a lot of Stephen's insight about gender comes from a pivotal moment in our marriage, which I think many two-career partnerships face, where we were at a crossroads, where he could not pursue he had a tenure-track job at City College in New York, and I had the opportunity to edit Toronto Life magazine here in Toronto, and we had to figure out, without splitting up the marriage, we couldn't both pursue these futures. And we had to balance a ton of things in making that really tough decision. And I think, of course, so much of the book comes from that moment where Steve came back to Toronto, and instead of me, I spent a year being the spouse of the great new hire at City College in New York, and then he suddenly was the spouse of the big new hire at Toronto Life. And that became a kind of eye-opening experience for you, I think you'd say.
Yeah, that's fair.
I noticed that you were introduced first as wife tonight, and I kind of...
It's a funny word, isn't it?
Are you a wife first, or are you editor-in-chief first? It depends on the context. It's interesting.
Probably tonight. Well, you're always editor-in-chief. I mean, even the fact that I'm sitting here is because you told me to sit in the middle. So
That's true, actually.
that did actually happen in the back room. So
I said it was International Women's Day, so he had to obey, but I wonder what excuse I'll have tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
To be fair, she told me where to sit also.
Right, exactly.
But I found those footnotes, especially on the passage that you're talking about, one of the most revealing, because you were framing the decision in this particular way, where you're sitting in the park with playing, and you felt like a part of this particular community, and
Yeah.
your wife phones in with this peach of a job offer.
Yeah.
Right? And the way she talks about it is much different than the way you do.
Right. Well, I mean, I think. But do you want to answer that first?
One of the most interesting ideas that drives the book, I think, and I'm saying this both as wife and editor, is the idea that in these sort of big moments of reckoning about domestic responsibility, who's going to do what, whose career is going to take precedence, or who's going to have to make the sacrifice. And I certainly know marriages where they go back and forth, where it's his career for a while, her career, or in gay marriages, her career for a while and then her career. I think what Stephen is arguing is that the argument was never give up your job for feminism.
Yeah.
It was a global sort of familial cost-benefit analysis.
It boiled down to money.
It was very practical.
Well, no,
Right.
you laugh, but like the thing
Yeah.
is, like it really did boil down to money, and I think that domestic questions of this nature, like they're not ideological in the way that they might have been in the 70s. Or even in the 80s. Like, it just boils down to, like, there's free hospitals and education in Toronto, and you're going to be making a lot more money than I can make in New York. And the family can make a lot more money in Toronto than we can make. So it's not really even a decision.
Right.
Right? It's not because of I'm somehow woke. Right? It's not like I'm somehow, like, I came to some kind of, like, revelation. Right? It's like, it's actually like, it just comes down to money.
And
then the deeper argument in the book is that that's actually economics actually shapes everything, right? Like all of this other stuff that we tend to think of as an intellectual or political movement, like actually it's this economic process at work, and we're just playing catch up all the time.
Well, one of the interesting things for me now, having, as Bob said, I've been working at this magazine in an employer type capacity for many years now, and I've seen people on my staff, men and women, decide who's going to take parental leave. I think, we always call it mat leave or pat leave, but really it's parental leave. And these decisions are being made on these very practical terms. A dad's going to take the 7 months because mom is a specialized kind of doctor, and she makes 3 times as much money. And also, he really likes hanging out with baby in the coffee shop. And one of the blessings of this new way of living, which is really radical, is that when dads there are studies that show that when dads get more time with baby, biologically, they're more connected with that child for the rest of their lives. I think it's sort of even in the, I have an 11-year-old son, so it's been like 10 years that we've been wrestling with this issue. And now when I see even people now who are much younger than me making these decisions, they see even more evolved in terms of sharing the distributions of labor. And I think it's really cool.
But for them too, it comes down to money, right?
I think it's very practical. It's
Yeah.
very expensive to live in Toronto. We all know the cost of real estate. We all know we have, I was reading an article in the Toronto Star, is Bob listening, about a, Ontario-wide daycare crisis. And, it's a fortune if you can get in. And so a lot of these decisions are being made about whose career is more paramount during those particularly tender and important early childhood ages. Now, of course, there are arguments about can women really get those top jobs in the first place? I mean, I'm talking about a time when you've already established your kind of economic reality, and there are certainly barriers around that.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about that
Yeah.
in the book with the term hollow patriarchy.
Right.
Can you explain to the audience what you're talking about there?
Well, I mean, it was my attempt to deal with gender, like what's happening to, whenever you read these pieces, it tends to be women are suffering or men are suffering. And like, I think that the important point is like, actually, when you look at the process from both sides, something very contradictory is happening, which is that women are rising in the middle class. They keep being a greater percentage of breadwinners. The pay gap, despite is closing. Women's labor, it's closing very slowly, but it is closing. Women's labor participation rate is closing much more closely. I mean, that is changing really dramatically. And then you have that on the one hand. Nearly 60% of undergraduates now are female. Women are now 50% of graduate students, and so on. And at the same time, the top jobs and really ownership jobs. So like, the jobs that are iconic of power remain really overwhelmingly male. So there's a huge, Hollywood directors would probably be the most egregious example, where it's 98% male. In the top 7 studios, which is just an insane number. But like equity partnerships and law firms is only 16% female. And there are a lot of female lawyers out there. 50% of the lawyers graduating are female, but equity partnerships are only 16%. That's really insane. Also, things like, who becomes, so what you're seeing is like a contradiction, which is that women are rising in the middle class, but they're denied this top level of power, and so masculinity is losing power, but it remains iconic of power. And I mean, I wrote this before Donald Trump could even have been conceived of, but I think Donald Trump becoming president while Hillary Clinton wins 3 million votes, I mean, that is the best conceivable example of the hollow patriarchy that I can think of. Like a man who cannot, he was spotted yesterday. I'm a little obsessed with his clothes, but he was spotted yesterday with tape. He taped his tie with 3 pieces of tape. Now, this is like a sign of like mental breakdown, but it's also a sign of someone who was not taught how to tie a tie by his father.
Could
right?
be, could
like,
be.
Well, that's not how you don't use Scotch tape on the back
Really?
of your tie.
Oh, okay.
Like, you just don't, right? So, so not to be, well, also he wears terrible shirts and anyway, but like.
Somehow I think that's like the least of the problems with Donald Trump.
Every time I bring it up, I think
Or
like.
is it?
No, I'm not sure, because the fact that he cannot wear a proper shirt is a sign. What that means, like his thing is like this. Okay, I'm just going to make this last point and then I'll be done with it. Is that he's not listening to his tailor.
Right.
Like his tailor says to him, "Sir, you're a 17-inch neck," and he says, "No, I'm not. I'm a 16 and a quarter."
Right.
And so he gets a shirt that doesn't fit, and he insists on wearing it, even though it obviously doesn't fit him. I mean, it's like a psychosis. Okay, that's it. I'm done with the. I'm done with the clothes.
I do have a Trump question, so I'll take it. I'll give it to you now, which is, Trump is a couple of lines in your book.
Yeah.
And you have him there with an interesting phrase: masculine overcompensation.
Yes. Well, this was not in the book, but there is this study that. There's this phenomenon called the masculine overcompensation thesis, which has been shown in about 30 studies from this one group out in California, which is that if you subtly threaten people's masculinity, they overcompensate on all kinds of ways, sexual, even one of the things was like willingness to buy an SUV.
It's in the
right?
book.
Like,
it's
yeah,
in the book.
It's in the book, yeah. Like literally willingness to buy an SUV is one of the effects of threat, and there is no female equivalent of this, right? Like when you threaten people's femininity, they don't respond to the stuff. So like to me, Trump is like the perfect embodiment of masculine overcompensation, right? I mean, a man who's constantly talking about the size of his genitals, that really can only mean one thing,
Right.
Right? I mean,
But moving the conversation back.
You're on your own. I'm not saving you.
Care to footnote?
As long as you're not mad, I'm fine.
You have no footnote on that?
No footnote.
But taking the conversation back into the intimacy of the family, let's put Donald Trump outside the house.
Great, let's
concentrate
do that.
on the.
I couldn't be happier about that.
You talk in the book a little bit about your mother and about how she kind of led you to a very interesting conclusion about equality through her example of Lamaze.
Right. My mother, who's here in the room today. Hi, Janet. Well, she told me that one of the most important things in changing gender roles that she'd seen in her career as a physician was that when men saw their babies being born, that changed a huge amount for men. And that changed, and that was sort of the beginning of men as caretakers, which makes a lot of sense to me. And that was not the other thing that's interesting about that is that that was not part of the women's movement specifically, right? Like that was part of that men wanted that.
Interesting.
Rather than women telling men how to behave. This was something that men wanted for themselves. And I think that is actually a very interesting part of this journey, which is, rare to find because men don't talk about this stuff ever, right? And they have really very few frameworks for discussing these things. But that was a very important one for men.
Yeah, my husband held both of my babies before I did.
Right.
I don't know if it was the same for you.
I did, yeah.
First one, yeah.
First one, not second one. Yeah.
You talk a lot about...
But who's counting?
You talk a lot about fatherhood being key to the success of households in the book. And it led me to really question, you flicked it at gay families a little bit as a kind of a paragon of success that we haven't quite figured out yet, that they're very successful. And it led me to the question about gender in the home. Is it fatherhood that is necessary in the home, or is it a strong two-parent family?
It's a great mystery, and the research is really pretty vague. No one really understands what it is because, like for example, fatherhood and having a having a father is the single greatest correlate of social mobility that you can find. So this is a thing that is not like the Harvard study called, I forget what it was called, the American Dream or something like that, studied just a colossal number of American families. I think it was 90,000. I mean, some ridiculous amount of research went into it. And that was the number one correlate. I mean, think about that. Like, think about more than schools, more than the neighborhood you're in, more than any other demographic feature, right? But the one exception to that is lesbian households, which have no variance from that at all.
Right.
But that's such a small group that it's actually it's too narrow to actually figure out whether it's one or the other.
Right.
Like certainly there's lesbian households show no variance from that. But the research is kind of out on that, and in this book, because it's such fraught territory and such difficult territory, I'd like to stay with stuff that I actually felt like somebody else knew what they were talking about, at least. That I could look at the research and say like, okay, well, this is very clear, and so that I don't think is clear at all.
Right. Let's talk about porn.
Okay. Sure.
The whole chapter.
Everything was going so well until then.
But there's a whole chapter in the book about porn.
Yes, yeah.
And some uncomfortable truths in there.
Yeah, I mean, that was the only piece of mine that I've ever written that was commissioned twice and killed twice.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a...
What you mean by killed is like...
Yeah.
It was commissioned by a
publication
magazine.
Said, we would like you to write a really in-depth piece on the sociology of pornography. Yes, sir. May I have some gruel? I will write that for you. Then I write it, and then they don't like what they see so much that they end up killing.
Although, meaningfully, they would still pay him.
Yeah, well,
They'd pay him to not publish the piece.
Yeah.
So that's how controversial it was. Now you all want to know what's in the article.
Yes, but first maybe we can...
I think a sample comes out on the Walrus tomorrow.
Oh, good.
Brave enough to do it. I didn't know that. Great.
Oh, they
Well, they found someone else was publishing it, so they can't be to blame.
Right.
Jennifer will be to blame.
Yeah, excellent.
But let's talk about that chapter and your reaction to it, Sara, a little bit before we jump right in. And, it's controversial subject matter, and what did you make of it when you read it?
Well, maybe, do you want to explain what you said first?
Well, I mean, even talking about it is so fraught and difficult. I mean, it's such a long piece. It's like 7,000 words. I mean...
The central thesis, from what I understand from reading Steve,
okay.
You trust me to give it a whirl?
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Is that it's been studied quite a lot, that in cultures where there has been a high consumption of pornography, reported cases of sexual assault go down, which is, of course...
which doesn't make any sense.
And no feminist wants to hear that, because the overwhelming consensus is that pornography, much of which is awful and vile and degrading to women, must be a terrible thing. And just like we think video games that are violent lead to actual violence, the thinking is pornography that involves violence against women must, we just imagine, lead to people being violent toward men, being violent towards women. So Stephen's done the research. I just read his chapter, but apparently that's not true.
Well, there's two contradictory streams of research, which is like, on the one hand, if you put men in front of pornography and then test their responses for it in the immediate aftermath, they will show signs of greater hostility towards women, greater willingness to see women raped, tons of things like this.
Agreeing with lower sentences for rape.
Rape and things like that. And there are, and those studies have been replicated like hundreds and hundreds of times from the 70s on. I mean, that's really pretty non-negotiable. On the other hand, like the other research, which also has been replicated in many countries, is that like the countries that have pornography are like the history of pornography in the 20th century was Sweden first, and then Germany.
What do you mean, they first got porn? No.
They invented it. They invented hardcore pornography. The Swedes, and then the Germans, and then they did. I mean, they in the 60s, and then in the 70s it moved to Germany, and then in the 80s it moved to America and to Japan. And then and then it spread everywhere. And basically every country where you see where pornography arrives, there's a decline in sexual assault. And so this has been noted in a dozen countries, and it's been noted. There was a famous study by an economist called Todd Kendall, who saw that when internet access arrived, high-speed internet access arrived, it arrived state by state. It arrived in different states at different times. So it arrived in Arkansas at a different time than it arrived in New York. And so every state that it arrived in, as it arrived, saw a 7% decline in sexual assault. So these are very, like, I call it the paradox, the pornography paradox, because it doesn't really make sense. On the other hand, both of these streams of research, I think, need to be taken into account when we think about this, because mostly when we think about this, it's really become like pure moral outrage.
Yeah.
And I just really think that's unhealthy. Like, what we actually need is a return to like the Dr. Ruth sexual health kind of like, let's be sensible and treat this as a public health issue. Like, who's the doctor that you listen to?
Sue Johansson.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Sue.
Yeah. Somebody's applauding for Dr. Sue. Yeah.
Well, she was amazing.
She was amazing. I had lunch with Dr. Ruth once. She invited me out for lunch, and she was just incredible. She was just one of the most amazing women I've ever met.
It's true. Steve came back from that lunch, and I was a little worried about our marriage.
I fell hard. Yeah. I mean, I fell hard for that woman. Like, it was like, wow.
Tiny little 90-year-old.
She was a tiny little
Spitfire.
90-year-old Jewish woman. She showed me pictures of when she'd been in the Israeli army in '48. And she showed me pictures of her with a sniper rifle, and the sniper rifle was better than her. She said, I was never very good I was good at the grenade, though. I mean, she was amazing.
But going back to Dr.
Right.
Sue a little
Right,
bit.
Dr. Sue, right.
I mean, I love the footnote in the book that you have about curling up under your blanket with
my
the
yellow
Walkman.
Sony Walkman.
Yellow
Oh, I
Sony
had one of those
Walkman,
too.
listening
Yeah.
to Dr. Sue.
On the radio
Yeah.
on Sunday nights. She would answer caller questions about sex. And they were often and her mission was to inform people and therefore empower people to make good choices and stay healthy. And she was just this sensible, mothering, dispenser of facts, really, no judgment. I was thinking about her in this debate we have in Ontario around teaching sexual health in the schools. And, I really think nothing could be more important than arming children with information. What age, what do they know exactly? That's all up for debate. But they're going to be learning about it anyway and talking about it anyway. Yeah. So let's arm them with the information that's factual that can help them make good choices.
But the problem is the research into it is very shallow because the research into it has been about how horrible it's been. And then it becomes one of these things where it's like, well, let's find out how much more horrible it is. And that's actually not very helpful. Like, you actually have to find, like, the consumption of this stuff is on a scale that is inconceivable, really. I mean, when I was looking at the site, which was 2013, YouPorn reported like
What's YouPorn?
One of the free porn sites. Like, there are 20 of these things. But it run out of Montreal, incidentally. But Canadian companies have profited from this disgraceful business. But they were then, that one site of their 16 or whatever it is, was bigger than CNN and Hulu put together.
Whoa.
They were streaming, like, they were up there with they were below the Googles and the Facebooks. Wow. But they were like, that was it, right? I mean, just absolutely enormous. And, you know, we don't really, like, the research into it is really fascinating, but like, and I got some of it into the book, but really there needs to be like a dramatic increase in the amount of work on this stuff. And like, a lot of people just want to shut down the research altogether. Right. And I think that's just because it's so gross. And it certainly is. But like, I think this is really, really important work.
Well, I'll have to read that excerpt tomorrow.
Great.
Pornography paradox. There's a number of very interesting phrases in the book that you've coined or used to kind of as turn points for your arguments. One that really resonated for me was that we're no longer engaged in a battle of the sexes, and we can't view the conversation between men and women that way anymore. That it's more of a labyrinth. What does that mean? Can you explain?
Well, I just think trying to understand the current gender, particularly the problems with intimacy, which seem to me the most interesting questions. So, like, the context of the hollow patriarchy, I don't find particularly interesting. I think there are actually political solutions to this stuff that we need to undertake. Mandated board memberships for women. Canada has 6% female board membership participation. Like, it's a disgrace. And I think like Trudeau's cabinet fit, that's really important.
Yeah.
That stuff matters. But like, our intimate lives are where these questions become much more vague. Right. And much more difficult. And to see, the thing is, I think also, like, when you look at the data, like, when looking at this data seriously, which is what this book really is, like me going into a deep dive on all of this sociological research on this stuff, the situation is getting better all the time. Really, like, it's even with the election of Donald Trump. Like, you have to remember the trends that are underway here have been underway for 100 years, and they're going only one way, because the period of the backlash against feminism, Reagan-Bush, like 1980 to 1992, those were the years where the pay gap closed the most rapidly in history. Went from 66 cents to 74 cents in those 12 years. And all of this, the economic reality is that women's participation in the labor market is nearing, it's not there yet, but it's nearing parity. And from that flows all this other stuff. Flows as women reach parity economically, violence against women declines. All these other things decline. All these other terrible things of the patriarchy fall apart of just in themselves, without really, like, it's not part of a movement or anything. They just do fall apart. And so to think of this process of, like, women getting equality, men and women trying to live together in marriages where they live as equals, as a battle, seems to me ridiculous. Like, what we're actually doing here is getting towards more intimacy and more justice, and that's for both genders, right? For both sexes. So why are we phrasing this as some kind of war when it's actually a huge liberation for everybody? Like, it's actually us figuring a way out. Not that there are, enormous crises all the time, but and not like things like pornography, which are really to me they're like the dark shadow of this rise to equality. But looking at the trends in any kind of serious way, to me, shows exactly one way. Like, there's no, like, they haven't retreated ever from 1915 on. So, like, I guess people predicting the future is for idiots, but on the other hand, we are getting to a better world, for sure.
Is there equality in that future world? What does that look like? Can it ever be achieved?
I mean, this is why the hollow patriarchy is such a hard thing, right?
I think there are a lot of messy beds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are
Well
the
put.
Thanks.
What a phrase.
unmade messy beds?
Yeah.
One of the things Steve talks about in the book is the sphere of housework.
Oh, that was my next question.
Perfect. So, in this, movement towards equality, we have to reassign roles, and something has to give. Do you want to talk about what that is?
No, I think you've got this one.
It seems to be the final frontier in your relationship.
One of the things Steve dug up in his research is that men are not doing more housework. This is probably not news to the audience here. It's just that women are doing a lot less. And so we're all kind of meeting in this filthy, happy place where equality is growing, and there are many unmade beds and dirty dishes in the sink.
That's right. I mean, I think equality may not look like what we thought it was going to look like, but housework is a really good example of that, where like men have literally not done more housework since the 80s, right? So think about all the things that men have done, and that's everywhere. That's Holland, Australia, Portugal, the United States. Like from the 80s, men have basically been doing the same amount. And think about how much men have been involved in food or child rearing, right? Where it's tripled. The amount of participation with children has tripled since the early 70s. But this they just won't. But at the same time, the amount women is doing is just going like this.
Yep.
It's called disinvestment, which is like a wonderful word, I think.
Disinvestment.
Like, disinvestment.
Wow.
Like because it's not just that you are doing less yourself, it's also that you're caring less about what other people are doing. Right, like it's just that a clean house as a signifier of value is just in decline, which is great.
Okay,
Maybe.
You know,
Maybe.
like it's just like I think we just have to chalk that up as a win. Maybe not for Sara, but
because you still really like the clean house. That gives you a sense of order. You right.
Our marriage is definitely best when there are three people. There's Steve with his job and me with my job, and then this magical third person that doesn't actually exist who runs around taking care of all the domestic stuff.
That's how we became Mormon.
In my house, that third person does exist.
Oh, really?
Permit me an anecdote. My husband got a raise a few years ago, and I said, what would you like to put the money towards? And he said, I want the cleaning person to come every week. And I said, you're crazy. And it took all the stress out of our week. And I wish everyone had the access to this, because it just feels, it took so much minor conflict out of our lives.
Yeah. I mean, did the conflict return after a while?
Well, it comes back in weird ways.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that's
there.
interesting about it, right? Like, because the nature of housework is one of the most, I find it a really fascinating question because no one can really define it. There's all this work on it. There's this immense sociological body of work on it. And
on what defines housework?
Well, for a while they just said, they had this standard definition of housework, which was just like sweeping thing. And then there's this amazing Canadian study, I just think it's amazing, where they actually went and asked women, like, what do you consider housework?
Right.
And the answers were calling the relatives back home 3 times a week. That's my housework. Yeah. Praying for the family is my housework.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And like the thing about housework is like this is getting weirdly academic, but like Marx and Engels could not decide what housework was. So Engels said that it was alienated labor, so that would be you hire someone to come and do it. Right? So that would be that means that after the communist revolution, there's no housework anymore. It's just taken care of by machines, and it's just alienated and it's gone. Marx thought it was part of craft. He thought it was part of you building your environment, which means that it will never go away. It means that even after communism, there will still be housework because you're building your environment. And that duality is replicated through the feminist debate, right? I mean, like, Simone de Beauvoir said that it was the absolute. She said no woman in her right mind would want to clean a house. Angela Davis said the same thing.
Yeah.
I recently rewatched the Stepford Wives.
Okay.
And the Stepford Wives, the first sign that they've become themachines is that they are obsessed with housework, right? And then on the other hand, this has now changed to where it's become like, on the other hand, it's like, well, it's actually devalued women's work, right? And so and actually what we need to do is respect this and treat it as a thing. But really that tension is kind of back to the Marx or Engels, like, is it just slavery to the house, or is it just, or is it actually like shaping your environment in a caring way? And I think the kind of truth is it's kind of both, right? I mean, it's kind of both, and we're never going to be able to untangle it completely.
I'm getting the signal that we're going to have but one more question before we get to your questions. So I think I want to center on how much I enjoyed the dual voice in this book. And I wonder if there is a co-written book in your future where you have equal voice.
Oh, this is it, I think. Unless you want to write a book, I'll footnote
I'm not
it,
100% sure our marriage could survive 2 of these.
Yeah, I mean, I happily footnote any book that you go to. This was a huge favor that my wife did for me.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, this is a
On
lot
the
of
toilet.
work. Yeah,
Right?
Yes.
in the morning.
There was one, Steve was like, the editor needs a draft, and you're going to have to write it because you need to footnote this area. It looks like it could use another footnote. I was like, okay, I'm going to lock myself in the bathroom for 10 minutes before going to work while all the noise of our household is around us, and I got the footnote done. So,
And the kids got to school too, so it was all fun.
everyone lived.
Everyone
They
lived.
were fed. They survived.
Yeah.
Stephen, did you veto any footnotes from Sara from going in?
I don't think so.
No, footnoting my footnotes. That's an interesting idea.
I thought about doing that a couple of times, but then I thought that would be too much.
Yeah.
I thought that would just be, I mean, come on. Like, I've had my say, right? But no, I don't think there was. I mean, what I wanted was, I thought it would be, I wanted honesty.
Yeah.
You know, this is a book about intimacy, so I think you have to take the risk of being intimate and just leaving it all out there and seeing what comes of it. So, you know, I didn't really, I don't think I vetoed anything,
When
did I?
Steve first published one of the essays that appears in this book in The Atlantic, he had this massive response, mostly on Facebook, where articles are shared and discussed and talked about. And many two-career partnerships responded with, oh my God, this is just like our scenario.
Yeah.
It's so familiar to us. You know, I was in this one job in Denver and he got a job somewhere. I mean, this is a very, very common story, and but it is very rarely reflected. So I think what Steve wanted me to do is just bring out all that, the messy truth of this very common experience on the page.
Well, I hope you'll reconsider, because I think it was really interesting to hear from both of your voices in the book and tonight. So I thank you,
Thank you.
very much.